There is a particular kind of tiredness that visits at the end of a long day, when the body has done what it came here to do, and the mind begins to loosen its grip on everything it held through the hours just past. This is the tiredness that does not ask you to hurry or decide or remember anything urgent. You are welcome to simply let it arrive. If you are new here, welcome to a quiet place where we collect the small and careful details of one-piece world you may already love, and we carry them gently through the evening together. Tonight we have 200 of them, and none of them will ask anything difficult of you. Only your attention, and only for as long as you want to give it. Subscribe if you'd like to find this place again, and let me know in the comments below, where are you listening from? The world of One Piece is large enough that we will never run out of things to notice. The One Piece world is divided by two great geographic features into 4 distinct bodies of ocean, each carrying its own name and its own character. The East Blue, where Luffy begins his journey, is described throughout the story as the weakest of the 4, a sea with the lowest average bounty figures and the least exposure to the extreme forces that define the Grand Line. Oda has said that this calibration was deliberate. The East Blue was designed to be the place a story could begin, a sea gentle enough to introduce an audience to a world without overwhelming either the protagonist or the reader before they had a chance to understand what was in front of them. Most of the significant people Luffy meets before entering the Grand Line carry bounties that, by the story's later standards, are modest numbers. The world's scale is introduced slowly, like eyes adjusting to a lit room after sitting in the dark. The West Blue is the sea of origin for Brook, and the sea where the Rumbar pirates sailed before their journey carried them past Reverse Mountain and into the Grand Line. The North Blue is the birthplace of Trafalgar Law and Vinsmoke Sanji, 2 people whose connection to the same northern sea carries entirely different kinds of weight. Sanji left the North Blue as a small child aboard a passenger ship that sank, an accident that placed him at the Baratie and set the entire course of what he would eventually become. Law was born in a city called Flavance, a place the story describes in quiet and specific and deeply sad terms, a city whose inhabitants carried a condition they did not know they had until they were already too ill to save. The South Blue is less charted in the story's narrative geography than the other 3, present in backstories and references more often than in direct exploration. It is the sea of origin for several of Boa Hancock's people, and for figures whose southern connections appear in profile notes rather than in extended scenes. The Grand Line itself is divided into 2 halves by the convergence of the red line above the undersea passage at Fishman Island. The first half of the Grand Line, entered through the Reverse Mountain at the base of the red line, has been called Paradise by those who have reached the second half. The name is ironic and sincere simultaneously. Compared to the New World, the first half is survivable in ways the second half frequently is not. The people who earned the right to call it Paradise did so by spending enough time in the New World to understand what the comparison actually meant. The New World is where the 4 emperors hold their territories, where the weather and the opponents and the general conditions of existence exceed what the first half demands. The Calm Belt, the strip of windless ocean bordering both sides of the Grand Line, created a specific military advantage for the world government that the story notes without drawing extended attention to. Ships crossing the Calm Belt without mechanical propulsion cannot proceed, and the Sea Kings concentrated in that stillness ensure that prolonged exposure is fatal for ordinary vessels. Marine bases positioned at the Calm Belt's edge are therefore naturally fortified on their exposed sides by something that costs the world government nothing to maintain. Seastone hulls, which suppress the response of Sea Kings, allow marine vessels to cross without confrontation, a capability that most pirate fleets cannot match. The strategic depth this creates is one of the quieter structural advantages held by the institution that would prefer everyone believe they hold every advantage. Sea stone kairoseki in the original Japanese is a mineral unique to the One Piece world. It emits a wavelength identical to the ocean's own energy, and for devil fruit users whose weakness to seawater is among the most consistent laws in the story's physical world, contact with sea stone produces the same debilitating effect as submersion without requiring any water at all. Handcuffs made from sea stone are among the most effective restraints the world government deploys against captured devil fruit users, and Oda has used them throughout the story to create situations where a character's abilities are suppressed precisely when they would most want to use them. The duration of a character's helplessness under sea stone restraint communicates something about who they are without the ability that defines them, which is occasionally more interesting than showing the ability itself. The properties of sea stone were also incorporated into marine ship hulls for calm belt navigation, and into the den mushi cage structures used at Impel Down to prevent devil fruit users from phasing through their containment. The mineral appears consistently enough in different applications that it functions as a quiet environmental constant, the world's solution to the problem of containing the extraordinary. The devil fruits of the One Piece world carry names in Japanese that often hold meanings beyond simple function, and these names were chosen with the same attention that Oda brings to birthdays and food preferences. Luffy's fruit is the Gomu Gomu no Mi, named for Gomu, the Japanese word for rubber, a name as direct as the ability it describes. The fruit was later revealed to carry a second name recorded in ancient texts. The Hito Hito no Mi Modolnika, identified as a mythical Zoan type, is the name under which the world government tracked it across centuries, designating it by the name of a sun deity associated in the mythology of enslaved people with liberation and freedom of the body. The distance between the simple word rubber and the ancient word for a liberating god is the distance the story traveled between its first chapter and this reveal. Ace's fruit is the Mera Mera no Me, taking its name from Mera Mera, the Japanese onomatopoeia, for the sound and visual impression of fire burning, a direct mapping of word to element. Whitebeard's fruit is the Gura Gura no Mi, named for the sound of vibration, the specific sensation of the ground shaking underfoot. The name communicates what the ability feels like before it communicates what it does. Marco's fruit is the Tori Tori no Mi, model phoenix, taking its name from Tori, the word for bird, a Zoan classification whose regenerative properties make it behave in combat more like a Logia defense than a standard transformation, an ambiguity the story uses deliberately. Trafalgar Law's fruit is the Ope Ope no Mi, taking its name from a phonetic borrowing of the English word operation, rendered as Ope in Japanese. The ability creates a spherical territory called a room within which the user can manipulate the spatial positions and physical properties of everything present as though performing surgery on the space itself. Law's background as a doctor and his fruit's name as a medical reference are connected with the same care that connects Sanji's birthday to his name. The naming is not decoration. It is the story's acknowledgement that the best things about a character usually point in the same direction. The Toki Toki no Mi, the fruit belonging to Kozuki Toki in Wano country, takes its name from Toki, the Japanese word for time. The ability to send people forward through time in a single direction was used by Toki to dispatch Momonosuke and others 20 years ahead into a future prepared to receive them. She could not travel forward herself. The ability, as described within the story's logic, moves others ahead but keeps its user fixed in place. She sent what needed to survive and remained. The Yomi Yomi no Mi, Brook's fruit, takes its name from yomi, the Japanese word for the underworld, the realm of the dead. A fruit named for the land of the dead that allows its user to return from death once is a name that functions simultaneously as description and as irony. Brook died. The fruit returned his soul to his body, which had by that time become a skeleton, and he has sailed as one ever since. The name Yomi appears in the story in a quiet second context as well, in a birthday connected to the same word, two separate details drawing from the same mythological source. You are welcome to subscribe before you drift further, and if you feel like it, leave a comment about which of the four blues you think you would have come from. The ancient weapons are three entities of extraordinary destructive potential, whose names and partial locations are recorded in certain poneglyphs. They carry the names Pluton, Poseidon, and Uranus, drawn from the traditions of different real-world mythological systems placed in a register of power that belongs to forces beyond individual human scale. Pluton is a warship, described in surviving records as capable of destroying entire islands in a single deployment. The master shipwrights of Water 7 maintained its blueprints for generations, kept not to build the ship but to serve as a counterweight, the theoretical capacity to answer Pluton with Pluton, if the original were ever deployed again. Iceberg, the mayor of Water 7, at the time of the story's visit there, held those blueprints and understood their weight precisely. A document that could end the world is not kept lightly, and it is not surrendered lightly either. Poseidon is not a ship or a constructed weapon. It is a designation, a title belonging to an individual born with the ability to communicate with and command sea kings. Princess Shirahoshi of Fishman Island carries this ability, a fact she did not fully understand for most of her life, and a fact that the people who understand its implications treat with extreme care. The capacity to call the largest creatures in the world's oceans, creatures that inhabit the calm belt and the ocean's deepest reaches, is enormous enough to reshape the world's geography if ever applied deliberately. The story holds this knowledge carefully across multiple arcs, present but not yet fully deployed. Uranus remains the least elaborated of the three, its nature and location not yet disclosed in published chapters as of the story's current arcs. Its name is there in the records. What the name points toward is still arriving. The road poneglyphs are four specific stone tablets whose content differs from the historical and instructional poneglyphs distributed across the world. Each records a location, and the four locations together identify the coordinates of Laugh-Tale, the final island at the end of the Grand Line, where Goldie Roger left the treasure that gave the story its title. Finding and reading all four is the navigational prerequisite for reaching the journey's end. The distribution of the four tablets across the territories of the four emperors is not something the ancient people who placed them could have predicted in detail, but the effect of their placement means that reaching Laugh-Tale requires passing through four of the most fortified and dangerous regions in the current world's seas. The road to the answer is the answer, in a way the story has never stated directly, but has always practiced. Big Mom held two of the four road poneglyphs, one aboard her personal ship, and one within the collection on Whole Cake Island. Kaido held one within Wano country. The fourth was located and copied by the Roger pirates during their voyage to Laugh-Tale. What happened to that poneglyph's location in the current timeline is one of the pieces of information the story has withheld in order to give it weight when it arrives. The poneglyphs themselves are extraordinary objects within the context of the world that contains them. They are enormous stone blocks distributed across various islands throughout the Grand Line and beyond, inscribed in a script so ancient that it fell out of common use centuries before the story begins. The material from which they are made is described as resistant to any conventional force capable of breaking it. a durability that was built into the medium deliberately by the people who created them. They were made to last beyond the circumstances that would eventually try to erase what they recorded. They were made to be found. The placement of poneglyphs across the world suggests a specific kind of confidence. They are not hidden in the way that something buried or locked away is hidden. They exist on islands, sometimes at the center of cultures that have grown around them across centuries without knowing what the inscriptions say. Whoever distributed them expected they would be found, that someone would come who could read them, that the trail they formed would eventually be followed by someone asking the right questions in the right order. The poneglyphs are a message to a specific future reader, written in a script made illegal by the institution that needed it to be unread. Now find a slower breath if you can. We are in no hurry in either direction. Gol D. Roger, whose execution in Logtown launched the era of pirates that forms the background of the entire story, did not reach that execution platform through capture in combat. He surrendered. He was dying of a disease that the story describes as incurable, a condition present long enough to shape the decisions he made during his final voyages. He chose the terms of his own ending, presenting himself to the Marines rather than being taken, and used the platform of his execution to say something to the world that couldn't be unsaid once he had said it. Whatever he called out from the gallows, the promise that everything he owned was out there for whoever was strong enough to find it, was not a final boast. It was a plan. It worked exactly as he intended. The Roger pirates were small by the scale of later Emperor fleets. They were notable for the quality of individual members rather than for numbers, a crew of specific and extraordinary people united under a captain, whose presence the story describes in terms that exceed what the power system alone can measure. Silvers Rayleigh, Roger's first mate, described Roger's conqueror's haki as something beyond anything he had encountered before or since. That description becomes more significant in the story's later arcs, when the audience has seen enough examples of conqueror's haki to understand the scale of the comparison being made. Rayleigh himself, the Dark King, chose after the crew's disbandment to live at Sabaody Archipelago, coating ships for the voyage to Fishman Island, maintaining a quiet presence at the threshold of the New World within walking distance of the place where slave auctions once sold human beings to celestial dragons. He was there when the Straw Hats arrived. He trained Luffy in haki during the 2-year separation. The man who stood at Roger's right hand was the same man who prepared the person the story positions as Roger's spiritual heir. These connections are not coincidences. They are architecture. Crocus, the lighthouse keeper of the Twin Cape at the entrance to the Grand Line, served as the Roger Pirates' ship doctor before spending the years after the crew's disbandment at his lighthouse, waiting. He expected someone would eventually come who was attempting what Roger had attempted, and he wanted to be present for that. He was there when the Going Merry passed through on the first day of the crew's Grand Line voyage, and the conversation he had with them was the first proper orientation about what the sea ahead would demand. He treated ships as patients and let this crew go toward exactly the kind of danger he had already seen cost a crew everything once. Whitebeard, Edward Newgate, organized his fleet not along military lines, but along the lines of a family. He called his crew members his sons and daughters, and they called him their father. And the story does not present this as metaphor or as sentimentality used for effect. It was the organizing principle of how that group of people understood their relationship to each other. He fought at Marineford with injuries that would have ended ordinary people long before the battle reached its conclusion. And what he said from the platform above the crowd, The declaration that the One Piece exists was broadcast across every Den Mushi that carried the Marineford signal. It reached islands and ports in every sea. It was heard by people who were children when he said it and who are still sailing because of what it meant. The Whitebeard pirates were organized into 16 numbered divisions during the story's Marineford era, each commanded by a division commander with individual strength, placing them above most independent pirates. Marco the Phoenix commanded the 1st Division and functioned as the crew's effective second-in-command. Portgas D. Ace commanded the 2nd. Jozu commanded the 3rd, carrying a Logia-type fruit that converted his body to diamond, a material the story used efficiently to establish his defensive capability in a single early scene. Each division had a name and a specific commander, and the structural detail given to the fleet provides it with a weight and coherence the story could have skipped, but did not. The Rocks Pirates are an older crew whose existence was classified by the world government and removed from accessible history. Their members included individuals who would later define the story's present era individually. Whitebeard sailed under rocks before founding his own crew. Big Mom sailed under rocks. Kaido sailed under rocks. The 3 emperor figures the story's second half spends the most time with were once shipmates under a captain the world was not permitted to know about. Captain Rocks D. Zebek was the person who held that crew together, and the incident that ended the Rocks Pirates involved a temporary alliance between Roger and marine hero Monkey D. Garp to counter the threat the crew posed to a gathering of celestial dragons at an island called God Valley. Roger and Garp cooperating, pirates and marines, against a shared threat is the kind of historical event that complicates any simple division between justice and freedom, which is exactly why the world government preferred it remain out of the general record. The history of the current era's most powerful institutions begins, more than once, with something those institutions would rather not acknowledge. Monkey D. Garp refused promotion to admiral throughout his career, a fact the story offers as a personal choice, rooted in his unwillingness to be placed under the direct authority of the celestial dragons that the admiral rank would have required him to serve. He held vice admiral rank and a reputation that exceeded the rank. He trained Kobe and Helmeppo in the story's early chapters, 2 characters whose development from insignificant figures at the East Blue's edge into capable Marine officers runs as a secondary arc through the story's background, visible enough to follow and quiet enough not to compete with the center. He is Luffy's grandfather and Roger's rival, and neither of those facts resolves into a simple statement about what he values or who he is. He stands across from his own family at Marineford and does not move. He carries the grief of that without setting down the obligation that required it. The story allows him to hold both without asking him to explain how. Smoker, introduced in Logtown, carries 2 cigars simultaneously, which is the most immediately visible detail about him and one of the least revealing. His pursuit of Luffy across multiple arcs reflects a personal understanding of what Luffy represents, rather than straightforward professional obligation. Tashigi, his subordinate, pursues named blades held by people who don't deserve them, a mission with a specific personal history the story provides across scenes distributed through the arcs. Her resemblance to Kuina, Zoro's childhood friend who died before the story begins, is presented as fact without explanation. An unresolved visual connection the story uses across multiple encounters without in any hurry to close. If you're still awake at this point, perhaps now is a good moment to let your eyes rest while the voice continues. There is no requirement to follow every word. Let them pass through at whatever depth finds you. The named swords of the One Piece world are organized into a hierarchy of 3 grades. The supreme grade swords are the 12 rarest, with Yoru at the absolute top. The black blade carried by Dracul Mihawk, the man who holds the title Zorro, is chasing across the entire story. Great Grade Swords number 21. Skillful grade swords are the next tier below. Wado Ichimonji, the white sword Zorro has carried since childhood, is a great grade blade, one he keeps as a vessel for the promise made to Quina and for the weight of her unrealized ambition. He carries her sword alongside his others as a kept promise given a physical form that he can hold. The concept of a black blade, a sword permanently changed in color by the condensed haki of its wielder, is one the story introduces and then makes relevant to Zorro's arc across the Wano Country chapters. All existing black blades are supreme grade. The process by which a blade becomes a black blade is not instant and not guaranteed. It is the result of sustained application of something internal, the expression of will into the object over time, until the object changes to reflect what the person holding it has become. The blade is not separate from the person. It is, in a sense, a record of them. The Cipher Paul agencies are the world government's intelligence and covert operations structure, numbered from 1 through 9 with a designation beyond standard numbering for the highest tier. Cipher Pole 9 is the most fully developed in the story, its agents carrying authority that places them above marine jurisdiction. The power they hold, referred to as the absolute justice privilege, allows them to kill targets without the standard process of trial and designation, a specific authorization that ordinary enforcement does not carry. Rob Lucci, the primary CP9 antagonist at Eni's lobby, underwent training that began in childhood, shaped by the world government's intelligence apparatus before he was old enough to choose it himself. His Rokushiki mastery, the 6-technique combat system taught to Cipher Pole agents, was developed to a level no previous CP9 agent had reached at his age. The 6 techniques are distinct approaches to physical combat. Soru produces movement speed through a rapid sequence of kicks, generating burst acceleration. Geppo creates temporary aerial footholds by kicking the air itself. Tekai hardens the muscles to the density of iron. Rankyaku produces a compressed force blade from a single kick. Shigen strikes with a single finger at penetrating velocity. Kami-e relaxes the body entirely, so incoming force finds nothing to catch. Each technique is a different answer to a different problem in combat, and a practitioner who masters all 6 can combine answers in ways the individual techniques do not suggest. Cipher Pole Aegis 0, CP0, operates above CP9's authority and answers directly to the celestial dragons. Its agents wear white masks and appear in the story's later arcs at points of escalating world-level significance. Their visual uniformity is the opposite of CP9's individual personalities. A design choice that communicates something about how the people at the absolute top of an institutional hierarchy understand their own identities relative to the institution they serve. Impel Down, the great undersea prison positioned below the red line, is organized into 6 descending levels, each named for the nature of its punishment. The levels are Crimson Hell, Starvation Hell, Beast Hell, Blazing Hell, Freezing Hell, and at the bottom, Eternal Hell, where the most dangerous prisoners the world government has acquired are maintained in conditions designed to make escape unthinkable. The prison is positioned below sea level, in part for the structural advantage this provides against devil fruit users, surrounded on all sides by the sea that weakens them without requiring the facility to deploy additional measures. Warden Magellan's devil fruit ability, the Doku Doku no Mai, produced poison in all its varieties, a capacity that made him a natural fit for a facility where the primary goal is containing the extraordinary. He eats through most of the day to maintain sufficient production of his ability, a biological cost the story notes with the same matter-of-fact tone it brings to other detail. He is very good at his job in the way that people who became the thing they were trained to be tend to be very good at their job. The Sabaody Archipelago, the island cluster at the base of the Red Line where ships prepare for the undersea descent to Fishman Island, is built from mangrove trees whose roots rise from the seafloor to create the island surfaces above. The sap of these trees forms the bubbles used as transportation across the archipelago and as the enclosing structures for the descent beneath the surface. The infrastructure of Sabaody runs on the biology of specific trees, the same way the Den Mushi communications network runs on the biology of snails, and the newspaper delivery system runs on the behavior of carrier birds. The world built its connectivity not by replacing nature with machines, but by finding what nature was already capable of and building around it. The slave auction houses once operating at Sabaody sold people to celestial dragons, a commerce the story portrays directly and uses as the immediate context for the incident that assigned the Straw Hats their simultaneous elevated bounties and scattered them across the world. The sequence concentrated the story's engagement with its slavery themes into a single direct event whose consequences shaped the arc that followed and the training period that followed that. Bartholomew Kuma, a warlord who cooperated with the world government's scientific program to be progressively modified into a weapon, carries a history with the Revolutionary Army that the story revealed across separate moments distributed through different arcs. His decision to submit to a modification process that would eventually remove his autonomous will entirely was connected to a specific request he made as the price of that cooperation, a request involving the Straw Hats that the story disclosed slowly, piece by piece, reserving the full meaning for a moment prepared by everything that preceded it. The Pacifista program, which used Kuma as its original human template to produce mass-manufactured cyborg soldiers, represents the world government's effort to mechanize the kind of strength that normally exists only in specific individuals. The PX units share Kuma's physical specifications and his paw fruit beam attack, but lack the original's devil fruit ability. The program's existence is one of several places where the story illustrates the specific institutional logic of the world government, which understands power as something to be controlled and reproduced, rather than something that belongs to the people who embody it. The Kamabaka Kingdom on Momoiro Island, where Sanji spent his 2 years of training during the time skip, practices a culinary philosophy involving food that develops the body's capabilities through specific prepared dishes. The 99 masters of Nukama Kenpo each hold a secret recipe, and the collection of all 99 became Sanji's stated objective for those 2 years, a goal the story frames with consistent comedy while acknowledging that the capabilities he developed there contributed meaningfully to what he was capable of afterward. The way of the sea involves learning from wherever the sea sends you, even if the sea's choices are, occasionally, aggressively uncomfortable. The Okamas of that island, the new Kama community, practice a style of living and a set of values that the story has engaged with across different registers over the years. Their appearance in Sanji's backstory arc functions partly as comedy and partly as a genuine demonstration of a community that found its own way to exist in a world that did not make room for it easily. The Revolutionary Army's regional structure assigns commanders to different geographic areas of the world, with Sabo serving as Chief of Staff, placing him among the organization's most operationally significant members. Dragon's origins, his personal history before founding the Army, and the specific event that turned a Marine officer's son toward dismantling the institution his father served, are among the most carefully preserved mysteries the story holds. The detail given about Dragon across the arcs is precisely enough to make him coherent. The detail withheld is precisely enough to keep him significant. Bartholomew Kuma's devil fruit, the Nikyu no Mi, the The paw fruit allows him to repel anything, removing it from its current position and sending it somewhere else. This includes abstract things like pain, fatigue, and the intangible contents of a person's spirit, as the story demonstrated when he extracted the suffering from Luffy after Marineford and distributed it piece by piece to the crew's other members to bear while Luffy recovered. The scene in which each crew member absorbs a portion of what Luffy carried is one of the story's quieter emotional demonstrations of what belonging to a crew actually means. It is given briefly, and then the story moves on, which is sometimes how the most significant things are handled. The Germa 66, the scientific military force connected to the Vinsmoke family, developed technology for cloning soldiers with modified combat instincts, fear and pain removed from the biology of the produced soldiers. The modification technology was applied to Sanji's siblings while they were still developing before birth, producing the version of the Vinsmoke children the story introduced in the Whole Cake Island arc. Sanji was not successfully modified, an outcome his father Judge considered a failure and that the story presents as the condition of his humanity. What his siblings received made them exceptional soldiers. What they did not receive is what made them something less than people, and the Whole Cake Island arc spent considerable time on the question of which of those outcomes represents the actual failure. Settle a little further now. The remaining facts will find you wherever you have drifted. The Jolly Roger of the Straw Hat Pirates carries one specific difference from the standard skull and crossbones that identifies the crew from every other flag in the seas. The skull wears a straw hat, a detail simple enough to state in a single sentence and present enough to identify the crew at a distance before any other information is visible. Every pirate crew in the story carries its own design, and most of those designs communicate something about the crew's nature before any other introduction is offered. Whitebeard's flag replaced the crossed bones below the skull with crossed Picento blades, his specific armament incorporated into the symbol rather than represented generically. Big Mom's flag included a crown, a formality that reflected the political structure of Tato land sovereignty. Kaido's flag incorporated a stylized oni, reflecting the visual identity he imposed on Wano country during his occupation. The three admirals of the story's first half each carried color-based code names that translated into the names of birds. Aokiji, blue pheasant. Akainu, red dog. Kizaru, yellow monkey. The practice of code names is standard for the admiral rank, a layer of designation that separates the institutional role from the personal identity in a way the rank below and above do not require in the same way. The three code names were also the names of characters from a famous older Japanese story, a reference that the story embedded without explaining, available to readers who recognized it and invisible to those who did not, present either way. Aokiji Kuzan carried the cold quality of his ability into his general presentation. Unhurried and blue-tinted, willing to freeze a significant section of ocean, rather than exert additional effort. He slept on sea ice during his rest hours, a detail offered in the post-Marineford coverage with the same tone used for every other small character note. His eventual departure from the Marine Organization following a direct confrontation with Akainu represents a genuine institutional shift, one that the story allowed to happen off the page, its consequences more present than its details. Akainu Sakazuki carries an absolute justice philosophy that views any tolerance for impurity as itself impure, a position the story tests across specific scenes by having it cost specific lives that other positions might have saved. His rise to Fleet Admiral after Marineford represents the Marine Organization moving toward his approach, an institutional shift with consequences the story's New World arcs continue to trace. The newspaper distribution system of the One Piece world delivers information across a single organization's network, the World Economy newspaper, using trained birds to carry printed editions to ports and settlements across every connected sea. The sight of these birds arriving with folded papers is a recurring visual across different arcs, a piece of the world's infrastructure that appears so consistently it becomes unremarkable, until the story uses what it represents to do something specific. When the newspapers arrived with the Straw Hats' new bounties after Eni's lobby, the story showed the reactions of people in distant locations reading the same pages simultaneously. The technique demonstrated the scope of what the crew had done by reflecting it across multiple distant faces at once, a narrative geometry that the story has used at other bounty reveal moments. The same information lands differently depending on who is holding the paper. The will of D is one of the story's most sustained and careful mysteries. People who carry the D initial in their names appear across the story in positions of significance, as heroes and villains, as Marines and as pirates, without a single institutional connection that explains their presence in the same category. Garp carries it, Roger carried it, Luffy carries it, Ace carried it, Law carries it, Teach carries it. The initial appears across different families and different nations and different centuries. A mark that means something the story has not yet stated plainly, but that people with relevant knowledge treat with specific recognition. What the story has offered is the suggestion that the D initial is connected to the conflict of the Void Century, to a group of people whose values or existence stood in opposition to the kings who became the world government. The people who know the most about what the Void Century recorded, those who have dedicated their lives to following the poneglyphs, treat the D initial with a particular awareness that casual encounters with the name do not produce. They know something about it that the general population does not. Whether that knowledge is something the story will state plainly or will allow to be understood without declaration is itself a question the story holds for as long as it can. The concept of awakening, the development of a devil fruit ability beyond its standard parameters, was introduced in the New World arcs to describe a stage of mastery that changes the relationship between the ability and the world around the user. For Zoan types, awakening increases physical capabilities and healing rates beyond the already heightened levels of the standard transformation. For Paramecia types, awakening generally extends the ability's influence beyond the user's body into the surrounding environment, transforming the world around the user rather than only the user themselves. For Logia types, the nature of awakening is less elaborated in the story's published material. Don Quixote do Flamingo's awakened use of his string ability produced Birdcage, a dome of strings encircling all of Dressrosa and contracting slowly. The technique continued regardless of how the fight proceeded, creating a time constraint on a confrontation that would otherwise have allowed sustained engagement. It was one of the more mechanically successful uses of awakening as a story device, a power whose pressure was structural rather than simply physical, one that changed the conditions of the fight rather than just adding force to it. The red line is the single continuous landmass that encircles the one-piece world from pole to pole, dividing the oceans into 4 quadrants and crossing the Grand Line at 2 points. Mary G. Wise, the fortress city of the celestial dragons and the seat of the world government's civilian authority, sits atop the red line at its intersection with the Grand Line. The positioning was not incidental. The founders of the world government placed their seat of power at the literal crossing point of the world's defining geography, a position from which all the world's significant seas are accessible, and none of them are beyond reach. The place you build from communicates something about how you understand your relationship to everything around you. They built from the center, above it all, looking down. The Florian Triangle, the vast stretch of permanently fogged ocean crossed during the story's approach to Thriller Bark, is described as a region where ships disappear and where enormous shadowed figures have been reported moving beneath the fog. The Ark's explanation accounts for many of the disappearances. It does not account for the full scale of what has been seen in the fog. That remainder sits in the story as an uncollected thread, present and unresolved, which is occasionally how a world communicates that it is larger than the story currently requires it to be. The Sky Islands above the Grand Line were reached by the crew through the knock-up stream, a column of ocean water rising from the surface to the sky under the pressure of an undersea geological event. Surviving the ascent required understanding the stream's mechanics well enough to position the ship correctly, which NAMI identified from the available data. The Sky Islands above are real places with their own histories and their own populations. Skypians and Shandians and Burkans, all descended from people who reached the sky through different circumstances across different centuries. The Shandians carried a history connected to a poneglyph their ancestors had protected for generations without being able to read it, which is the particular condition of being a guardian of something you understand is important without understanding why. The dials of the Sky Island region represent what a civilization develops when its available materials are unusual. They are shells found in the sky, capable of absorbing and releasing different forms of energy depending on their type. An impact dial absorbs kinetic force and releases it back at high concentration. A flame dial stores fire. A flash dial releases light. A breath dial stores wind. An axe dial releases a cutting force. A reject dial absorbs force at a rate that the human body cannot handle and releases it at devastating concentration, the cost falling on the user as much as the target. USOP incorporated several dial types into his combat toolkit after the Skypa Arc, integrating Sky Island technology into a ground-level arsenal without ceremony. He found something useful and kept it. That is how his toolkit grew across the whole story, accumulation by pragmatic decision. Eiichiro Oda's creative process for developing new arcs begins with establishing notes about where the crew is going and what they will encounter there, working outward from the island's visual identity and central conflict. Character designs are developed through multiple iterations, beginning from silhouettes that communicate a character's essential nature before any details are added. The silhouette approach is one of the more practically useful details about how he works, because a character whose silhouette is immediately readable can carry identity across a crowded page or a fast-paced scene in a way that detailed but visually ambiguous designs cannot. Oda has spoken across various interviews about the physical reality of maintaining a weekly schedule across decades of publication. The minimal sleep, the consistent production, the assistants who handled specific panel elements, while the creative core of every chapter remained his responsibility entirely. He took breaks when his health required and returned to the same schedule after them. The SBS corner in this context is not professionally required. It is something additional, an extension of his engagement with the world he has built, maintained in the margins of a schedule that already left very little margin. Every answer given in those corner columns became permanent, part of the world's architecture, a fact that all future decisions had to accommodate. The obligation expanded with each response, requiring more birthdays and more detail, but the expansion was chosen rather than demanded. He kept the corner because the readers who sent questions cared about the world he was building, and he cared about them knowing it more fully than the story's pages alone could show. There is something in the accumulation of small and specific details that makes a world feel inhabited rather than described. The distinction is not always obvious, but it is always felt. A world that has been described contains the places and people the camera visits. A world that has been inhabited contains also the places the camera does not visit, the facts that would never appear in any chapter and would not need to, the height of someone the audience will see once, the birthday of a character who exists in a single panel, the preferred drink of a person who lives in a kingdom the crew passes through and does not return to. Oda built an inhabited world, and the evidence of that inhabitation is present in everything from the central mysteries of the Void Century to the preferred tea preparation of a skeleton who spent 45 years sailing alone through fog. The large and the small receive the same care because the care is not proportional to significance. It is simply what the world deserves when the world is worth caring about completely. The Straw Hat Pirates are a crew of people who know each other in the specific and irreplaceable way that comes from crossing something difficult together. The crew has been scattered and reunited. It has been to the sky and under the ocean and inside a whale, and through the most fortified prison the world government could construct. It has stood in front of things it should not have survived, and made decisions that could not be unmade. And every time the ship has sailed forward, every time the log pose has pointed toward the next island, every time the Den Den Mushi has carried a voice across an impossible distance, the world has been there, fully itself, inhabited all the way to its edges, holding every detail in place. The sea does not change. The crew still sails. The dream is still somewhere ahead of the needle, waiting in the direction it points. And somewhere in a studio, someone who has spent decades keeping careful records of measurements and birthdays and blood types and laugh sounds is still working, still noting down the detail of someone who has not appeared yet, still making the world one small thing more complete. That is enough for tonight. If you are still awake, perhaps close your eyes now. There is another story ready if this one did not carry you all the way, and it will be there when you need it. Let the voice become something in the background, something that does not need your full attention, that is simply present the way the sound of water is present when you are close to the sea. The flags sail above ships on dark water somewhere. The log pose turns slowly toward the next island in the chain. The vivre cards of everyone the crew loves are burning at exactly the rate they should be burning, steady and slow, each one a small fire held between two fingers, pointing home. Sleep well. The sea will still be there tomorrow, and everything worth finding in it will still be waiting, patient and unhurried, exactly where it has always been. Thank you for sailing through the One Piece world with me tonight. If you'd like to keep drifting, another video is ready on the left of your screen. Maybe let it play as you close your eyes. The Straw Hat sits somewhere still. The ship sails on. If you have found your way to sleep somewhere in the last hour, that is exactly where you were supposed to go. If you are still here, still listening, still following the voice through the dark, then you are welcome to what remains. There is not much further to travel tonight. And if these quiet voyages through the world of One Piece are something you want to return to, subscribing is the simplest way to find them again. The channel will be here whenever you are ready to sail. Sanji's dream is the All Blue, a legendary sea where the fish of all four blues exist together in a single body of water. East bluefish and west bluefish and north bluefish and south bluefish sharing one location that the world's current geography should make impossible. Most sailors who have heard of the All Blue treat it as a story told in ports, assembled from different things people wanted to be true. Sanji does not. He pursues it with the same certainty Luffy pursues the One Piece, and Zoro pursues the title of the world's greatest swordsman, which is to say with complete and unqualified commitment, regardless of whether anyone else believes the destination exists. The dreams of the Straw Hat crew members are a specific kind of fact about who they are. They are not ambitions in the professional sense, not goals chosen for their practicality or their likelihood of success. They are the things a person decided at some point early and formative, that the world was large enough to contain, and that they were going to find if the world could be crossed far enough. Luffy's dream of becoming king of the pirates was decided before he understood what it would require. Robin's dream of finding the Rio Poneglyph and reading the full record of the Void Century was chosen in the aftermath of everything she lost and everything that was taken from her, a decision made by someone who had already paid more than most people are asked to pay for the right to simply want something. Nami's dream of drawing a complete map of the entire world was formed by someone who grew up in a village she was not free to leave, who learned to love navigation because the knowledge of where things were was the closest she could come to going there. These dreams predate the crew. They existed in separate people before those people met each other, before any of them knew what the Grand Line would look like from the inside, before the ship had a name or a crew or a route. The crew formed around the dreams rather than the dreams forming around the crew, which means what holds them together is something older and more personal than any shared adventure, and something that would still be there if the adventures stopped. The number of islands visited by the Straw Hats across the story's arcs is large enough that the total count is difficult to fix precisely, because not every island receives a name or a dedicated arc. There are islands the crew passes through briefly, islands seen from the water without landing, islands mentioned in conversation as places that were and were not. The world is full of them, each with its own magnetic signature, each requiring its own calibration on the log pose. The specific character of the Grand Line means the crew did not choose which islands came next. The sea made that decision, and they followed it. The route was the route, and the places they arrived were the places the needle pointed. The fact that the route was not chosen does not make the places less theirs. The island where something changed is still the island where something changed, even if the crew never would have selected it from a chart. Some of the most significant places in any life arrive without invitation, by the logic of what came before, rather than by deliberate selection. The One Piece world builds that truth into its navigation system. You follow the needle. The needle leads somewhere. What you find there belongs to you, whether you chose it or not. The sound of the sea at night, if you have ever slept near one, is a rhythm that does not need to mean anything in order to work. It moves, it returns, it moves again. There is no conclusion in it and no urgency only the same motion repeated in slightly different form across the same stretch of water, patient as anything that has been doing one thing for a very long time. The one-piece world is full of that sound. The ships move across it. The crew sleeps under deck and above it, in hammocks and on flat surfaces, and wherever sleep arrived before a better option was found. The watch changes. Someone makes tea. The needle on the log pose holds its bearing through the dark, pointing toward the next island in the chain, the one they haven't reached yet, the one they will know when they get there. You do not need to know where the needle is pointing tonight. You only need to rest.